The vast emptiness of space stretched before James Miller's scout ship as he guided it through the border systems. It was supposed to be another routine patrol, just like the hundreds before it. The ship's sensors hummed quietly, scanning for any unusual activity near the disputed sectors between human and Vex space. James sipped his coffee, making a face at its lukewarm temperature. He had been out here for 6 hours already, and nothing interesting had happened. The most excitement he'd had was watching a small asteroid tumble past his view screen. He started humming an old tune, something his grandfather used to sing about space cowboys. The first warning came as a slight fluctuation in his sensor readings. James frowned, tapping the display screen. The numbers didn't make sense. It was as if space itself was bending around his ship. His training kicked in, and he immediately began running diagnostic checks. "Control, this is Scout Ship Delta 7, he reported calmly. "I'm picking up some strange readings out here. Might be nothing, but..." The second warning wasn't subtle at all. His ship's systems suddenly went dark, every screen blinking out simultaneously. The emergency lights kicked in, bathing the cockpit in an eerie red glow. James felt his heart rate increase, but years of training kept him focused. He reached for the manual override, but before he could flip the switch, a massive shadow fell over his ship. The Vex warship seemed to materialize out of nowhere, its sleek, crystalline structure reflecting the light of distant stars. It was beautiful in a terrifying way, like a predatory fish that had evolved to look like a work of art. James had seen pictures during his briefings, but nothing prepared him for the real thing. A mechanical voice echoed through his ship's speakers, somehow working despite all systems being down. "Human vessel, you have entered restricted space. Prepare for boarding." James checked his navigation systems, or tried to, since they were still dead. He knew for a fact he had been well within human territory. "Actually," he said to no one in particular, "I'm pretty sure you're in our space." The tractor beam that grabbed his ship didn't care about his opinion on territorial disputes. As his small scout ship was pulled into the massive hangar of the Vex warship, James did what any reasonable human would do. He finished his coffee. If he was going to be captured by aliens, he wasn't going to waste perfectly good caffeine, lukewarm or not. The boarding party that greeted him was exactly what you'd expect from the Vex: precise, efficient, and about as emotional as a calculator. Their metallic armor gleamed under the hangar lights, and their movements were so synchronized it looked like they were part of a dance routine. "Exit your vessel with your appendages visible," the lead Vex commanded. James stepped out, hands raised, but couldn't help himself. "I assume you mean my arms and legs, because technically my nose is also an appendage, and it's always visible unless I'm wearing a mask." The Vex soldiers glanced at each other, their mechanical eyes whirring as they adjusted focus. James could almost hear their processors trying to determine if he was being serious or not. "You will be taken for questioning," the leader finally stated, ignoring his comment. "The Vex Empire requires information about human military capabilities." "Oh, is that all?" James smiled. "Why didn't you just send an email? Our customer service department would have been happy to help." As they led him away, James noticed how the Vex soldiers maintained their distance, as if unsure what to make of him. Their species was known throughout the galaxy for their logical nature and technological superiority. They had probably expected him to be terrified, or at least properly intimidated. Instead, they got a human who made jokes about appendages and customer service while being taken prisoner. James could tell this was already confusing them, and they hadn't even started the real interrogation yet. What the Vex Empire didn't understand, what they couldn't understand, was that they had just made the crucial mistake of capturing the wrong species. They were about to learn that human minds didn't work like their logical, orderly computers. And James Miller was going to enjoy teaching them that lesson. Commander Gray stood before the control panel of the truth extraction chamber, his metallic fingers moving swiftly across the glowing displays. The room was a masterpiece of Vex engineering, sleek, efficient, and completely intimidating to most species. The walls were lined with neural scanners and truth detection arrays, each one more advanced than anything humans had ever seen. Or so he thought. "Begin prisoner preparation sequence," he ordered, his voice carrying the emotionless tone typical of the Vex. The chamber hummed to life, lights pulsing in perfect geometric patterns designed to disorient and confuse. Through the observation window, he watched as two guards led James Miller into the chamber. The human walked with an easy stride, looking around the room as if he were touring a museum rather than entering an interrogation facility. "This is quite fancy," James commented, settling into the neural interface chair. "Love what you've done with the lighting." "Very disco." Commander Gray's optical sensors whirred in confusion. Their database had no reference for disco. He made a note to research this term later. "The chamber is designed to extract truth through multiple methods," Gray explained, his voice echoing through the room's speakers. "Resistance is not only futile but potentially harmful to your neural pathways." James nodded thoughtfully. "You know, I had a dentist once who said something similar. Turned out I was allergic to the mouthwash." The guards exchanged glances. One of them shifted uncomfortably, their perfectly synchronized movements faltering for a moment. Gray activated the first phase of the interrogation sequence. The chair's neural interfaces connected with James's nervous system, and the room's ambient lighting shifted to a deep, pulsing purple designed to induce a state of suggestibility in most species. "Your mind will now be open to us," Gray announced. "The neural probes are calibrated to map your thought patterns and detect any attempt at deception." "That's neat," James replied, looking genuinely interested. "Does it also pick up earworms? Because I've had the duck song stuck in my head all morning, and it's driving me crazy." The neural mapping display suddenly showed an unusual pattern. Gray leaned forward, studying the readings. They seemed to indicate that the human was simultaneously thinking about several unrelated concepts: a waterfowl, a musical composition, and a convenience store. "Your attempts at distraction are pointless," Gray stated. "The chamber has a 99.97% success rate across all known species." James raised an eyebrow. "What happened to the 0.03%? Gray paused, his processors humming. "That information is not relevant to this procedure." "Oh, come on," James grinned. "You can't just drop a statistic like that and not tell the story." "Was it another human?" "I bet it was another human." The truth detection arrays were beginning to show conflicting readings. According to the displays, the human was both telling the truth and lying simultaneously, which should have been impossible. Gray decided to move to the second phase. The neural interfaces began their deep scan, designed to break through any mental defenses and access raw memories. "You will now experience a complete neural mapping sequence," Gray announced. "Your memories will be categorized and analyzed for strategic information." "Cool," James replied. "Hey, while you're in there, could you help me remember where I left my keys last Thursday? It's been bugging me for days." The neural mapping computer suddenly displayed a warning message. The human's thought patterns were jumping between memories seemingly at random, with no logical connection or sequence. "Your mind appears to be unusually structured," Gray noted, trying to make sense of the readings. "Thanks," James beamed. "My mom always said I was special." Speaking of moms, did you know that in human culture, we have entire categories of jokes specifically about mothers-in-law? The warning messages on the display multiplied. The computer was having trouble distinguishing between actual memories and something it labeled as dad jokes. Commander Gray's perfect day was starting to unravel, and he had a sinking feeling that it was only going to get worse. Much worse. The first phase of interrogation had been running for 30 minutes, and Commander Gray was starting to experience what humans might call a headache, if Vex had heads that could ache. "Let us begin with simple questions," Gray announced, trying to establish a baseline. "What is your role in human space forces?" "Oh, I'm just a scout," James replied cheerfully. "Kind of like a space mailman, but with less mail and more space. Speaking of mail, did you hear about the letter that got married? It had a lot of address problems. The truth detection system pinged rapidly. The first part of his statement registered as truth, but the system couldn't process the second part. There was no record of mail getting married in any known database. Your attempt at humor is irrelevant, Gray stated firmly. What are the defensive capabilities of your vessel? James scratched his chin thoughtfully. Well, it's got cup holders. Really good ones, too. They can hold cups of almost any size. Revolutionary technology, if you ask me. Changed the whole game of space travel. The neural scanners started displaying error messages. They were detecting genuine sincerity in his statements about cup holders, which made no logical sense in a military context. You will provide accurate information about your military technology, Gray insisted, increasing the intensity of the psychological pressure field. Oh, military technology. James perked up. Did you know we once had something called a tactical spatula in our kitchen unit? Great for flipping burgers under heavy fire. The surgeon never believed me when I said it was essential equipment. One of the guard's optical sensors started twitching. The other one was making a soft whirring noise that sounded suspiciously like suppressed laughter, something that had never happened before in Vec's history. Gray tried a different approach. Our scans indicate your species recently developed new shielding technology. Explain its principles. Well, James began, settling into his chair like he was about to tell a bedtime story. It all started when someone spilled coffee on the shield generator. Turns out caffeine does amazing things to force fields. Who knew, right? Of course, that's not as impressive as the time we discovered that playing polka music makes the engines run 2% more efficiently. The main computer suddenly displayed a critical warning. It was detecting multiple layers of truth, lies, and something it labeled as complete nonsense, all overlapping in ways that shouldn't be possible. You are attempting to confuse our systems, Gray accused, his metallic voice showing the first hints of frustration. Me? Confuse someone? James looked genuinely hurt. I would never. I'm as straightforward as a curved line in non-Euclidean space. Hey, that reminds me of another joke. Why don't Vex tell dad jokes? Gray knew he shouldn't ask. Every logical circuit in his system warned against it. But some newly developed glitch in his programming made him say, why? Because they don't know who their data is. James delivered the punchline with a huge grin. 3 monitoring systems immediately crashed. One guard made a sound that their species had never made before, something that might have been a snort. The other guard quickly led their companion out of the room, citing possible mechanical malfunction. Commander Gray stared at the human, his processors working overtime to understand what was happening. According to all their intelligence, humans were a relatively simple species. They should have broken under the psychological pressure within minutes. Instead, this human was somehow breaking their systems with nothing but words. Perhaps we should move to more advanced measures, Gray announced, trying to regain control of the situation. Ooh, sounds fun, James replied. While we're waiting for that, want to hear about the time we taught an AI to understand sarcasm? Poor thing had an existential crisis and started writing poetry about binary code. Really deep stuff, lots of ones and zeros. As Gray initialized the advanced neural probes, he began to suspect that capturing this human might have been a serious mistake. But surely, he thought, no species could resist the full power of Vex technology. He was about to learn just how wrong that assumption was. Commander Gray activated the advanced neural probes with a sense of certainty. No species had ever resisted this level of technology. The room hummed with power as dozens of holographic interfaces sprang to life around James's chair. These probes will directly map your neural pathways, Gray explained, his voice carrying a hint of satisfaction. No amount of verbal distraction will help you now. Neat. James watched the swirling patterns of light with genuine interest. It's like a laser light show. You know what this needs? Music. Do you know Never Gonna Give You Up by Rick Astley? Before Gray could stop him, James started whistling the tune. The neural mapping system suddenly sparked, trying to correlate the musical pattern with cognitive function. "Stop that immediately," Gray ordered. "Stop what? The whistling or the thinking about whistling? Because now I'm doing both. Also thinking about dancing. And cats. Ever seen a cat dance? They don't, usually, but the thought is funny." The main display screen began showing impossible readings. James's neural pathways were lighting up in patterns that defied all known laws of cognitive science. He was somehow thinking in parallel streams, each one more chaotic than the last. "Your mind." Gray paused, his processors struggling to analyze the data. "It makes no sense. How are you thinking about 17 different things simultaneously?" "Oh, that's just normal human multitasking." James shrugged. "Right now I'm thinking about lunch, remembering my first bicycle, planning what to say next, wondering if fish get thirsty, and trying to remember all the words to Bohemian Rhapsody. Want me to sing it?" "No." Gray's response came too quickly, betraying his growing concern. "Focus on answering questions about your military capabilities." Speaking of military capabilities, James continued as if he hadn't heard. "Did you know that humans once tried to train cats as spies? It didn't work because they kept getting distracted by butterflies. Kind of like how I'm getting distracted right now by wondering if butterflies ever get dizzy from all that flying around." The neural mapping computer started making sounds that no VEX machine had ever made before. Smoke whisked from its ventilation ports as it tried to track the rapidly branching paths of human consciousness. Gray watched in horror as the most advanced cognitive scanning system in the galaxy struggled to keep up with a single human stream of consciousness. "Your highest-rated military encryption protocols." Gray tried desperately. "Tell me about them." "Oh, sure. They're based on trying to understand the plot of soap operas. Even we can't crack them because nobody can keep track of who's married to who and who came back from the dead for the third time." Warning lights began flashing across every console. The neural probes were detecting truth patterns in statements that couldn't possibly be true, creating logical paradoxes that threatened to crash the entire system. "This is impossible," Gray muttered, his metallic fingers flying over the controls. "No organic mind should be able to maintain this level of cognitive dissonance." James grinned. "Want to hear something really impossible? I'm also solving a crossword puzzle in my head. 7 across is giving me trouble, though. 5 letters, completely logical species that's about to have a really bad day. I think it spells VEXED. The main neural mapping unit suddenly shut down, its processors overloaded by trying to simultaneously track actual puzzle-solving activity, mixed with what it classified as deliberate nonsense. A new guard rushed into the room. "Commander, the auxiliary processing units are showing signs of stress. They're trying to understand something called knock-knock jokes, and it's causing system-wide instabilities." Gray stared at the human, who was now humming what appeared to be multiple songs at once while tapping different rhythms with each hand. "Shall I begin another scan, Commander?" the guard asked nervously. Gray watched as James started explaining the plot of something called soap operas to the previous neural scan's backup memory. The backup memory was, impossibly, taking notes. "No," Gray replied slowly. "I believe we need to reconsider our approach. This requires something more." James brightened. "Ooh, are we going to try interpretive dance next? Because I have some great ideas about that." The Vex Empire's most advanced interrogation system had just been defeated by what humans called random thoughts. And somehow, Gray knew, it was about to get much worse. Commander Gray had not entered sleep mode for what humans would call 3 days. He stood in his private command center, surrounded by holographic displays showing brainwave patterns, psychological analyses, and thousands of error messages. "There must be a way," he muttered, his usually perfect posture showing signs of strain. "Every problem has a logical solution." The door slid open, and a nervous junior officer entered. "Commander, the human is requesting his daily coffee break again." "Denied," Gray snapped. His constant demands for this coffee substance are clearly part of some psychological warfare technique. Sir, the officer hesitated. The last time we denied his coffee, he spent 2 hours explaining something called Monday mornings to the guard staff. 3 of them have requested immediate mental recalibration. In the interrogation chamber, James sat with his usual relaxed posture, now humming something he called a TV commercial jingle from the 1990s. The neural scanners had given up trying to map his thoughts and were instead playing the jingle back in perfect harmony. Gray stormed into the chamber. Enough. You will explain how you are resisting our techniques. Oh, that's easy. James smiled. I'm using something we humans call reverse psychology. Or am I? Maybe I'm using reverse psychology. Or maybe I'm just thinking about pancakes. Speaking of which, did you know that the record for most pancakes eaten in one sitting is? Stop. Gray's voice modulator cracked slightly. Your species cannot be this. This? Random, chaotic, delightfully unpredictable. James suggested helpfully. You know what this reminds me of? The time my grandmother tried to teach her cat to play chess. The cat won, but we're still not sure if it was actually playing or just knocking pieces over. Gray's optical sensors flickered. You are attempting to confuse me with irrelevant data. Actually, James leaned forward conspiratorially. I'm trying to explain how humans think. You see, right now I'm simultaneously wondering about chess-playing cats, planning my next vacation, remembering the lyrics to Yellow Submarine, and thinking about what I'm thinking about. The room's main computer began playing Yellow Submarine through its speakers. Nobody had programmed it to do that. Sir, another officer rushed in. The ship's main AI is asking questions about something called internet memes and dad jokes. It's also trying to understand why humans say easy as pie when making pie is actually quite complicated. Gray's processors were running so hot his exterior plating had begun to change color. This is a military interrogation. You will provide tactical information about human defenses. Sure thing, James replied brightly. Sometimes we defend ourselves by showing cute cat videos to hostile aliens. They either become our friends or their logical circuits fry trying to understand why we spend so much time watching felines knock things off tables. The ship's lights flickered as the main AI attempted to search its databases for cat videos. The humans, Gray realized with growing horror, they weaponized nonsense. Not really, James shrugged. We just are what we are. Did you know that some humans collect rubber ducks? No tactical value whatsoever. We just think they're neat. Gray sank into a chair, his mechanical limbs moving jerkily. But everything must have a purpose. Everything must make sense. Want to really have your mind blown? James grinned. Sometimes humans do things for no reason at all. We call it fun. The word fun echoed through the ship's communication system, causing minor malfunctions in every computer it passed through. 3 more guards requested mental recalibration, and the ship's AI began writing poetry about rubber ducks. Gray's voice stabilized as he came to a decision. I need to report this to High Command. This level of cognitive warfare is beyond our current capabilities. As Gray hurried out of the room, James called after him. Hey, while you're gone, could you get me some coffee? Also want to hear about the time we taught an AI to understand knock-knock jokes. The last guard in the room turned to James with genuine curiosity. What happened to the AI? It started telling its own jokes, James smiled. They were terrible, but we laughed anyway. Because that's what friends do. The guard's logic processors never stood a chance. Alarms blared throughout the Vex warship as systems began failing in ways that should have been impossible. The ship's main AI had started writing love poems to the backup processors, which were too busy trying to understand human puns to maintain basic ship functions. What is happening to my ship? Commander Gray demanded, watching as another bank of computers shut down after trying to analyze human meme culture. James sat comfortably in his chair, now untied because the restraint computer had decided it needed a coffee break too. "Oh, this reminds me of Murphy's Law," he said cheerfully. "What is Murphy's Law?" Gray asked before he could stop himself. "Anything that can go wrong will go wrong," James explained. "It's like a universal constant for humans, kind of like gravity, but with more irony." The moment James finished speaking, the ship's gravity generators flickered. Gray watched in horror as his perfectly organized data tablets floated off his desk. "That's not possible," Gray insisted. "You cannot simply mention a human concept and make it manifest." Actually, James caught a floating tablet and began doodling on it. "That's exactly how Murphy's Law works. As soon as you say something can't happen, it usually does. Like right now, I bet you're thinking your ship's translation matrix couldn't possibly start speaking in rhymes." The ship's computer immediately announced in sing-song, "Warning, warning, oh what fun. System crashes have begun." Gray's optical sensors started twitching uncontrollably. "Stop this at once." "I'm not doing anything," James shrugged. "I'm just explaining human concepts. Like right now, I'm thinking about how funny it would be if your serious military ship started playing old human disco music." The ship's speakers crackled to life with "Stayin' Alive" by the Bee Gees. 3 maintenance robots began dancing in the corridor. "Emergency shutdown," Gray commanded. "Shut down all non-essential systems." Sir," a terrified officer reported through the crackling intercom. "The systems are refusing to shut down. They say they're in the middle of learning something called the electric slide, and it would be rude to stop now." James nodded sympathetically. "You know what your problem is. You're trying to be logical about this. Humans learned long ago that sometimes the most logical thing to do is to be completely illogical." The ship's lights began pulsing in rhythm with the music. The medical bay reported that several Vex had developed something similar to human hiccups, which should have been physically impossible for their species. "This defies all known laws of physics and computation." Gray's voice was rising in pitch with each word. "Want to know something even funnier?" James grinned. "I actually have no idea how any of this is happening. I'm just making conversation, and your systems are doing all this on their own. It's like they're finally learning to have fun." The ship's AI chose that moment to tell its first joke. Why did the computer go to the doctor? Because it had a bad case of the humans. Gray watched as his perfect, logical world crumbled around him. The navigation system was reciting human poetry. The weapons computer had started a book club. And the maintenance robots were now attempting to perform synchronized swimming routines without water. "All I did," James continued, "was introduce your systems to human creativity. They did the rest themselves. It's beautiful, really. Like watching a butterfly emerge from its cocoon, except the butterfly is your ship's AI, and the cocoon is rigid logical thinking." "High Command," Gray whispered. "I must contact High Command." "Oh, I wouldn't worry about that," James smiled. "I think they're a bit busy right now. Last I heard, your communication system was trying to explain human interpretive dance to them." Through the viewport, Gray could see other Vex ships in the fleet starting to behave strangely. One had rearranged its escort formation into what appeared to be a smiley face. The collapse of Vex logic was spreading, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. Because how do you fight something that doesn't follow any rules, not even its own? 2 weeks after what became known as the Great Logic Crash, the Vex High Command gathered for an emergency session. The topic: what to do about the humans, and more specifically, how to handle the aftermath of James Miller's brief stay on their ship. The meeting room was different from usual. Someone had added potted plants, and the normally stark walls now featured motivational posters with pictures of cats saying, "Hang in there." Nobody admitted to making these changes. "Report status," the High Commander ordered, trying to ignore the fact that their chair had been replaced with something called a beanbag. A nervous officer stood up. "The situation is complicated. 17 of our warships have requested shore leave to find themselves. Our main battle computer has taken up painting, and the strategic planning AI is writing a book titled Learning to Human, a guide for logical species. From his seat at the center of the room, James Miller, now officially titled Human Cultural Advisor, sipped his coffee contentedly. After the incident, the Vex had quickly realized they needed him to help understand the changes spreading through their fleet. Furthermore, the officer continued, our ship's A's have started developing what they call personalities. The flagship now insists on being called Bob and signs all its communications with smiley faces. The High Commander's optical sensors dimmed slightly, and the peace treaty with the humans. Signed and ratified. Another officer reported, we've officially classified humans as Level X beings, too dangerous to interrogate, too unpredictable to fight, and too interesting to ignore. James raised his hand. If I might add something. The room fell silent. Several Vex officers unconsciously reached for their logic stabilizers. You know, James said casually, this whole thing reminds me of what we humans call a happy accident. Like when you try to make something perfect, but the imperfect result turns out better than what you planned. 3 junior officers immediately began taking notes. The room's computer started playing gentle background music. The humans have offered to help us understand these changes, the High Commander announced. They are establishing what they call cultural exchange programs. Oh, those are fun. James grinned. We can start with movie nights. I've got this great film called Monty Python and the Holy Grail that I think you'll love. Several officers who had already been exposed to human humor started making soft whirring sounds that suspiciously resembled chuckling. There is one more matter, the High Commander said. Commander Gray has requested a new assignment. Ah yes, James nodded. How's he doing with his poetry? The room's holographic display showed an image of the former interrogator, now wearing what appeared to be a beret. Gray had recently published a collection of poems titled Logic's End, a journey into human chaos, which had become surprisingly popular among the Vex. He's teaching a class on human creative thinking, an officer explained. The waiting list is 3 months long. The High Commander rose, their metallic frame catching the light. This brings us to our final point, the human concept of friendship. We wish to explore it further. James smiled warmly. That's the best idea you've had yet. And you know what friends do. They share jokes, stories, and most importantly, they learn from each other. As if on cue, the ship's AI began playing the song, You've Got a Friend in Me. Just one condition, James added, holding up his coffee cup. We're going to need a lot more coffee machines around here. The meeting ended with something unprecedented in Vex history. Laughter. Real, genuine laughter, not just the sound of malfunctioning processors. Later that day, as James walked through the ship's corridors, he passed maintenance robots humming human songs, saw computer screens displaying cat videos, and heard Vex officers discussing the concept of weekend hobbies. The great and logical Vex Empire had changed forever, all because they made the mistake of trying to interrogate a human. But as James had taught them, sometimes the best things in life come from making mistakes. And somewhere in the ship, a computer was already writing a joke about it.